To begin with, please join us in giving a big round of applause as we welcome our first eminent and respected Dr. Praveen Iyer, sir, renowned for integrating emerging technologies and inspire us on his talk. We would like to welcome the chairpersons of the session, respected Dr. Ravindran, sir, HOD and Professor, Department of Microbiology, Kilpatrick Medical College, Chennai, and Sparkling MD Coordinator, and respected Dr. M. Balasubramanian, sir, HOD and Professor, Department of Ophthalmology, Government Medical College, and recent member of Medical Education, to introduce the speaker.
Good morning, all. He is in GS Medical College with KEM Hospital, which is a reputed institution. That scale is a 100-year-old hospital. And SAR is there. It's the addition of and have been center. And is the director of GSMC. Medical institution. It's a faculty of the International Institute of Sport. As 6 so college, I welcome Dr. Praveen sir for this first session, which is going to speak about self-directed learning. Success in medical education is success or misadventure. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone, and respected chairpersons and organizers and delegates who have joined for the conference. It is my proud privilege and pleasure to be a part of this conference and presenting to you all in this plenary session about self-directed learning in CBME, whether it's a success or misadventure. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you let me know if the screen is visible?
Yes, visible, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And is my audio clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. So, self-directed learning is something that has been in vogue since time immemorial. However, it has really taken a step ahead in CBME when this was introduced in 2019. So, right at the outset, I would like to pay my acknowledgements, first of all, to the organizers of this conference, DEEPAM MedCON 2026, for having invited me and given this opportunity to speak to you all on the topic. Our Dean, Dr. Sangeeta Rawat, who always encourages and supports us in all academic endeavors. Dr. Kishore Kushale, HOD Anatomy, the department to which I belong. He always is very supportive. And the Department of Medical Education at our institute, from where we always learn a lot of things and use the resources for presenting at conferences. So the flow of discussion for this topic will be as follows. I'll be talking a little bit on the history and current relevance of SDL. Then I'll touch upon why self-directed learning in CBME. Then we'll come to what is self-directed learning. And we'll take a journey through the evolution of the implementation of SDL in CBME curriculum from 2019 till date, what challenges we faced, and what could be the strategies to maximize the use of self-directed learning and its success. So as I said in the beginning, self-directed learning as a concept is deep-rooted in ancient Indian history. We all know the example of Ekalavya, who was not given an opportunity to actually attend formal training under his guru. The motivation that he had for learning was tremendous, and it was not driven by any external examinations or external motivation, but he had a personal drive for learning. And that is what is desirable to do self-directed learning. And we know that how efficiently and effectively he learned the art of the archery, and he could compete with the best of best who trained under Guru Dronacharya. Our older curriculum, that is based on GMER 1997, had a mention of the word self-learning, but there was no mention of anything like self-directed learning. However, as the curriculum was revised after 22 years, in GMER 2019, when competency-based medical education was started for undergraduates in medical education, SDL was one of the newer elements that was actually given a thought, and it became a buzzword in the field of medical education. There was a lot of excitement when we all started CBME with all the newer elements in place. At the same time, with respect to SDL, there was a lot of confusion as well. That led to a few myths about SDL. Because we were not clear, there were confusion. So therefore, there were few thoughts which happened to be myths. For example, SDL is self-learning under a teacher's directions. So this myth obviously is a myth because it's not true. Then people felt that the teacher's role is diminished or irrelevant in SDL. So in this way, people equated self-directed learning with just self-learning by the learners. SDL is simply a teaching strategy. So people thought that SDL is one of the teaching learning methods, but that is incorrect. SDL means learning alone without any collaboration. So we can't learn together was one of the concepts that people developed in their mind. Then SDL topics are less important and they don't require teacher intervention. So this was another thought that people took. That, okay, it's SDL, so therefore there are so many non-core topics that can be taught, that can be assigned for SDL. And this, the last one, is the biggest myth that people still have, that every student is naturally equipped with the skills of self-directed learning. We'll see how each student is not. And this came out in this paper also from Anshu and Tejinder Singh. Now, our guiding force for implementing the new curriculum since 2019 has been the various resources and training programs conducted by the erstwhile Medical Council of India and the current National Medical Commission. So we all know that lot of training booklets were published by the erstwhile Medical Council of India along with the 3 volumes of the competencies of various subjects, and in which, if we see the list is quite exhaustive. So we have a document on foundation course, early clinical exposure, competency-based assessment, alignment and integration, skills training, logbook guidelines, electives module. But unfortunately, what is missing are the guidelines on self-directed learning. So the reason why these guidelines were not made available are really not known, but they are not available by the erstwhile MCI, nor are they available from the current National Medical Commission. So therefore, institutions and individual faculty were left to do self-directed learning on how to promote and conduct self-directed learning. So let's come to now, what is self-directed learning? Malcolm Knowles is credited with the concept of adult learning principles. He was the one who actually described those adult learning principles. Now, along with Malcolm Knowles, there was another person called as Alan Tuff. They both together came up with this concept of self-directed learning, and they defined self-directed learning as, now each word is quite important, therefore it has been highlighted in this definition of self-directed learning. It's a process in which individuals take the initiative with or without the help of others in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating learning outcomes. So if you look at the words that are used in the definition of self-directed learning, you will see that self-directed learning itself is a curriculum. All components of curriculum are seen in this definition. In simple words, to put what self-directed learning is actually the willingness of the learners to drive their own learning. And that is what is the most important thing. Then the question arises, if this is self-directed learning, why do we need self-directed learning, especially in this competency-based medical education? Now, let us first look at self-directed learning why, and then why in CBME. Self-directed learning, as you see the definition and the bottom line of willingness, it's a natural process of psychological development. How is it a natural process? Because as a person is born, obviously there is growth that happens physically and mentally, and the person moves from a stage of being dependent on people to becoming independent and taking up responsibility. So this is a natural process of physical as well as psychological development. Now, in medical curriculum, we know that it is quite vast. And the learners that we get through admission, they have different learning styles. Because they have got different learning styles, not only that, they also have different pace of learning. Some catch up fast, some catch up slow, and some are maybe average speed of learning. Medical students are considered as adult learners. Not only as adult learners, in the CBME curriculum, the goal is to prepare them and make them global learners as well. At the same time, we want to inculcate skills of lifelong learning amongst them. So lifelong learners is one of the roles that the Indian medical graduate has to fulfill. So for this, what is required is continuous learning. For that, refining skills is needed. And in addition, acquiring new skills is also required. Now, you will all agree to this, that the things that are being learned right now, they will become extinct in some time. And literature says that the half-life of things that are learned is less than 10 years. Now, if that is going to happen, then we are going to be in for future shock if we don't imbibe the self-directed learning skills amongst learners, and of course, not to say the least, amongst us also. Because learning happens from every experience, and it is not necessarily restricted to youth. So education is not just equal to youth. So to summarize, SDL is the ability to learn on one's own. That is the basic human competence for survival. Now, how is the process of learning involved? Now, we are all aware of this particular COPS continuum of learning or COPS cycle of experiential learning, where it begins from immediate reaction to learning and then long-term coping, that is adaptation. The experiential learning cycle always starts with a concrete learning experience. Then it is followed by reflections done by the learner, so that is reflective observation, which is followed by abstract conceptualization, that is conclusion from the learning experience. and then applying whatever concepts have been developed through active experimentation, leading to further concrete learning experience. So this is a cycle that continues, and this is how any learning happens. Adult learning definitely happens this way, and self-directed learning definitely has similar principles to adult learning. Now, as we said that a person moves from dependent stage to independent stage in life, a natural process of psychological development. Same is the case for a learner to be self-directed learner. So Gerald Gross has described these stages of self-directed learning. The lowest stage, of course, is being a dependent learner, where the learner relies on instructor. There is no self-direction, and the learning always is task-oriented. Then the learner moves to being interested, seeking some opportunities, setting some goals, and that builds confidence amongst the learners. The next stage that the learner moves to is becoming involved in the process of learning, recognizing the learning needs, able to learn by self, setting learning goals, and then plan action to achieve these goals. And finally, the highest stage of self-directed learner is that the learner is independent and sets own goals. They are intrinsically motivated, assesses what achievements have happened, and then tries to search valid and reliable resources for further learning. Now, if all this looks fine theoretically, how do we know whether students are ready for SDL? Because students are admitted to us after 12th standard. We know how they study in 12th standard and how they reach us. So how do we know that the students are ready? Now, readiness is a combination of both ability and motivation. The signs of readiness are self-discipline, being organized, ability to work autonomously, ability to communicate well, openness to accept feedback, and the ability to self-reflect. Now, are they all present in the learner? The third thing is that if a person is ready to learn in a particular situation, need not be the same for all situations. So therefore, readiness to learn is always situational. And how do we know that the students are ready? Having understood what readiness actually means, people have researched all over and designed learner readiness scales for self-directed learning. Now, there are many scales which are available in literature, and what basically the commonalities in those scales is they talk about, or they get us the competencies that are required for self-directed learning. So whenever we say apply these scales to our learners and we ask the students to score themselves on those scales, we get to classify the students and gauge their readiness for self-directed learning. Now, in our curriculum, what are the opportunities for SDL? There are formal opportunities and there are informal opportunities. So, PBL and CBL, flipped classroom, electives, e-learning, 8Com modules, seminars, journal clubs, open book exams, audits based on case records, and informal, of course, opportunities have been existing since time immemorial in bedside teaching, PG teaching, and many others. What strategies could be used to promote SDL? So this is a list which is mentioned in one of these papers: PBL, flipped classroom, knowledge mapping, reciprocal teaching, student doctor concept, which is a part of our curriculum now, technology enhanced learning, which COVID pandemic has actually made a boom of it, group projects. Then there is something called as learning contracts. Now, these learning contracts have been mentioned even by Malcolm Knowles in 1975. How a self-directed learner should have a learning contract with the instructor or the facilitator. And of course, reflective portfolios that will actually make the learners narrate their own learning experiences of how and what they felt about the learning process. Then comes the question, how do we institutionalize SDL and how do we place SDL in curricula? That is guided by a few factors. And elements that guide the placement and institutionalization of the self-directed learning are institutional environment, personal attributes of the learner, pedagogy and faculty development, and finally, assessment of learning that happens to self-directed learning. For this, of course, both kinds of motivations are required, internal as well as external. If you look at the details of each of these elements, there are a lot of things that are mentioned in this slide. And this is from a paper from Training for a Lifetime of Discovery, Teaching and Learning in Medicine. So if you see, self-directed learning is actually something that continues lifelong, and a person discovers about himself or herself as life progresses. So for institutionalizing self-directed learning, all these elements are important. So personal attributes of the learner is important. Faculty development and emphasizing role of the faculty for self-directed learning is important. Assessing the learning, and of course, providing a very conducive institutional environment for implementing this. Now, with reference to the CBME curriculum, we have seen how the curriculum has evolved in the last 6 years. We started off in 2019, and this was the number of hours in the curriculum that was prescribed for various subjects as far as self-directed learning is concerned. So if you see, for example, the subject I belong to, anatomy, 40 hours were given for self-directed learning at a stage when we were all excited but confused what is to be done in self-directed learning. And then, of course, we got struck by the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the NMC also got established, and we got some guideline that the hours may be reduced and some of this may be conducted beyond the working hours. And then in 2022, as the curriculum had to be rationalized into the time frame that was available because of the lost time during COVID-19 pandemic, the number of hours were readjusted. And finally, in 2023 and 24, it got stabilized to say these figures which are shown in this table. So for the subject of anatomy, from 40 hours in 2019 got reduced to 10 hours in 2023 and 24 guidelines. Likewise, if you look at other subjects, in few subjects, the self-directed learning hours got reduced, whereas in other subjects, it has got increased as well. But what you are seeing is, as the learner is progressing, the number of hours that are allotted in the curriculum for self-directed learning also has increased. That is because of the theory that the self-directed learner progresses from being dependent to becoming independent. So that rationale has been utilized by the authorities to increase the number of hours here. So same way, if you look at the clinical subjects here in phase 3 part 2, a whopping number of self-directed learning hours, if you see in the subject of medicine. Okay, in 2023, it was just 10. That was to adjust the timing of the curriculum. But now in 2024 guidelines, 55 hours are allotted. Same way for surgery, 40, OBGY 40, and so on and so forth. So the number of hours of self-directed learning in the clinical subjects definitely has been increased. 8Com module, what has happened in 8Com module? There was a mention of self-directed learning in 8Com module for every professional year within those modules. So you see 8 hours, 6 hours, and 16 hours phase-wise. Then, of course, in 2021, reduction. And 22 and 23, if you see, for first professional in 8Com module, the number of hours of self-directed learning has been relegated to nil. Now, of course, if we want the learners to learn, we will have to give them time to assimilate and do some things on their own under some directions. Let's see example of module 1.1. Now, if this was the structure provided by the MCI that time, there is a mention of 2 hours of self-directed learning in between all the other experiences that have been provided to the learner. So 2 hours of self-directed learning. So that's quite essential to assimilate things that are being learned, because this being something to do with attitude, ethics, and communication, they require time for assimilating things. And of course, what can be done in self-directed learning also was available in these modules. And then, of course, as the training programs also evolved, in the basic course in medical education, BCME, we introduced this session on self-directed learning. Now, in this course, the learning or the examples that were given of conducting self-directed learning was something like this. So 2 anchoring sessions for facilitation, instructions, etc. And in between the intertwining period of about 1 to 2 weeks, where the students actually explore and learn on their own based on what has been agreed upon during the first anchoring session, and finally discussing about the learning that happened in the intertwining period in the next face-to-face session. So this was one of the suggestions that came out through this session on self-directed learning in BCME. Now, if we look at assessment and self-directed learning, 2023 was a landmark year for internal assessment with reference to self-directed learning. Guidelines dated 1st August 2023 actually create a lot of ripples in our education society. So we are now familiar with this table, and we are all experiencing this table for the 2023 admission batch. So if you look at the theory component, seminar, museum study, and library assignments were three headings that were clubbed together under the heading of self-directed learning, under the larger heading of continuous internal assessment theory. So likewise, for every professional year and every subject, this is how the distribution was given, how to assess self-directed learning and map it in the internal assessment. So for community medicine, it was only museum study and library assignment. Probably this was a printing mistake. Seminar got left out here. Same happened for forensic medicine here. And then in pediatric ENT ophthalmology, again, it came back, of course, with varying scores. Medicine, surgery, OBGY, again, seminar, museum study, and library assignment. Now, what was actually the concept behind this was that the headings did not matter, but anything that was equivalent could be, which was not relevant to that particular discipline, could be replaced for doing self-directed learning. So that was what was in mind, but some structure was given through this table. This we came to know only later on when discussions happened. So now, obviously, it has evolved like this, but over a period of time, there were a lot of challenges that were there in promoting self-directed learning amongst the learners and also involving faculty members. So obviously, these are student-related, faculty-related, institution-related, educational environment-related, and also literature mentions that there are time constraints for self-directed learning. Now, when we say time constraints, it's a little something weird to think about it, but still time constraints also one of the factors. So what was faculty related factors? Of course, any change that is there, there'll be resistance to start off with. And at the same time, because we did not have any guide like for other elements, we were ill equipped with the skills and we tried exploring in our own way. Student related, of course, learners are at different levels of self-directed learning. So to cater to individual students or group of students at different levels was a challenge. Institution related, this is always existing. There's a large student-teacher ratio. So if you want the teachers to be facilitators for those many students who are undergoing self-directed learning, that's a challenge. And of course, the environment that is there in the institution also matters a lot. So if as a policy for the entire institution, things are implemented, it makes wonders. So what can be done for maximizing SDL for success? First, of course, to address the faculty-related issues, there has to be comprehensive faculty development, which cannot be a one-time cross-sectional measure. It has to be ongoing and focused. So apart from the training programs which are mandated by the NMC, in addition, as per the needs in the institution, we need to have a comprehensive faculty development program. Student support has to be there, which also has to be ongoing, but it has to start from the beginnings, right? Since admission, since the first year, it has to start. Then the concept of blended learning has to get impetus, providing autonomy and collaboration amongst the learners as well as the teachers. Resource optimization needs to be done in order to inculcate and maximize the success of SDL through augmenting resources in the library and encouraging digital resources. And finally, we have to come up with innovative assessment strategies that measure SDL competencies, reflective writing, training them in writing reflections as well as assessing those reflections. The art and science of portfolios, skill demonstrations, and provide frequent formative feedback on the learning that the learners are taking. And lastly, there needs to be a cultural shift where the environment has to incite curiosity amongst the learners, provide autonomy for learning, and between the faculty and students, there needs to be a mutual respect. So, if we want to say, is self-directed learning in CBME a success or misadventure? Right now, I don't think so. There is any answer to this. It will still take some time to conclude whether it is successful or it was a misadventure. What we can conclude through the experience of the last 6 years is definitely this, that self-directed learning in CBME was introduced with a purpose and it was aligned with the goal and roles of the Indian medical graduate. When we started, there was excitement and confusion. We all explored, learned, and followed different ways. However, with the experience of 6 years of CBME, we have some guide now how to go about implementing SDL, and we have seen the challenges, and based on that, the strategies that can be used to maximize SDL success. These are the references that have been used for this particular talk. These are institutes, St. G.S. Medical College and KEM Hospital. There are high rises. At the same time, the campus also has got a lot of greenery. And thank you very much for patiently listening to me.
And the students, but you have given the direction also to improve and effectively conduct self-directed learning sessions, and with your guidance I hope it will be a success. Thank you, sir. Any questions from the audience? Chat box, any questions? Online audience?
Okay, I'm seeing one question in the chat. In my college, students are not allowed to use phones or laptops during working hours. Is SDL to be done after working hours? So, if that is the case, that is a policy in the institution, then as I said, if this is restricting SDL, then we need to look at a policy change at the institutional level. That is one. Secondly, if SDL as a process is implemented during the allocated curriculum hours, there are other things that can be done during the allocated hours. We can provide resources in the form of hard copy, directions to say resources which are available in a hard copy format. And then if digital resources have to be used by the students, then ask them to do outside the working hours. Now, one of the concepts that is mooted in our BCME course in the session on self-directed learning is the intertwining period where actually students work together individually, mull upon the issues of learning, the objectives that have been defined through an anchoring session. And that is where the real learning actually happens. So that concept could be utilized in such situations. Okay, can you simplify in few steps how to implement correctly SDL in anatomy, for example, is one of the questions in the chat box. Let me give an example. So 2019, we were all lost. So we were trying to decipher what is to be actually done. So we ended up doing, say, for example, even in a large group, we asked them to read from the textbook and then ask questions, spending hours and hours of time. That also has been one of the things that we did. But now, as we see, the concept has evolved of self-directed learning. The theory has been actually put into practice. The number of hours has been rationalized in year one and increased in incrementally through the phases. So in anatomy, 10 hours. And we still follow the practice of allocating case discussions and seminars for the students. At the same time, there is early clinical exposure that is being done. So therefore, these provide us opportunities for inculcating the principles of self-directed learning in anatomy. So 10 hours easily get covered in these particular activities, and we have actually initiated the process of self-directed learning. So that is how we can do in a simplified manner in anatomy in the current situation of the curriculum.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Thank you for insightful talk. I just wanted to know if there is any difference between directed self-learning and self-directed learning.
Yes. In fact, there is another term that I want to actually bring in here. There is something called a self-regulated learning as well. So self-regulated learning is something similar to a self-regulated learning is something that a learner uses for basically gauging and progressing further at his own time. Whereas SDL in the curriculum is just trying to initiate this thought process amongst the learners, gauging the learners' readiness and the requirements, support that is required to be given by the learners. I mean, by the institution and the faculty members to the learners. So that is self-directed learning to motivate the learners, okay, based on their requirements. Whereas directed self-learning will be just giving instructions, giving directions to learners. Okay, this is what you need to do. Go home and study this and then come back and present to us. So that is directed self-learning. Whereas self-directed learning, as we have understood through these theories, is just providing a trigger to the learners and then allowing the learners to actually progress and supporting them as and when we are required as a support to them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the explanation.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I hope all the instructions and directions from Dr. Praveen Iyer will impart the self-directed learning and make our Indian medical graduates a lifelong learner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Your expertise pushed our participants to next professional level, sir. Thank you, sir.